How's it going, Star Seekers? I hope you're all doing alright, and welcome back to the channel, where today we're going to be taking a look at a game called Beautiful Desolation, a story-driven isometric adventure game set in a futuristic South Africa which has been reshaped by alien technology. You play as a guy called Mark Leslie, a Bono-looking chap with a bad haircut, who after finding himself stranded in a post-apocalyptic world alongside his brother and an AI-controlled robotic dog, must negotiate with the strange civilizations he finds there, undergo their trials to prove himself worthy, and seek out the objects required to take him and his partners back to their own world. Now, as always, if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and let's get straight into it and take a look at what you can expect from the game. So Beautiful Desolation has been ported from PC, where it received mostly positive reviews on Steam. It's available for £17.99 on the UK eShop and $19.99 on the US eShop. And before we get started, I just want to reiterate something that the developers made clear in their emails to me. Despite the game being very similar in appearance to isometric RPGs like the original Fallout and Wasteland games, Beautiful Desolation is a story-driven adventure game which operates similar to a point-and-click adventure game. It's also more of a slow burner with plenty of depth to its world's lore, so if you're more of a fast-paced action game kind of guy, then Beautiful Desolation might not be your kind of thing. Finally, I want to add that to avoid spoilers, I'm not going to be going into a huge amount of depth with the game's story or gameplay in this review, but I will set the scene for you and give you a general overview of how the game plays. So Beautiful Desolation opens with a cutscene which sees Mark and his wife driving through a storm as they discuss some issues surrounding Mark's brother Dom, this bearded lumberjack looking fella. A short while later they're involved in a violent crash as a huge triangle shaped object appears in the sky, and after this we jump forward 10 years where we learn Mark's wife died in the crash, and the triangle, now referred to as the Penrose, has reshaped humanity, providing unimaginable advancements in technology. After convincing his brother to fly him up to the Penrose to investigate something unusual, the pair of them are discovered by a robotic dog tasked with guarding the place, and as the dog attempts to radio through and report the intruders, a sudden explosion racks the place, after which Mark, Dom and the guard dog awake to find themselves in a completely different location. Now the story then follows the group's journey as they try to make sense of where, or more aptly when they are, and gameplay focuses around you repairing a structure which will then allow them to return to their own time. Now the game's control scheme has been reworked to remap its original mouse and keyboard controls to the Switch controller, and generally they work pretty well. You move Mark around with a left thumbstick, which can be a little janky at times but is functionally fine, and you can interact with different objects or people with the tap of the A button. Now as you work your way through the game, you'll accrue an assortment of items, all of which get stored within your inventory, and these can then be used on objects or NPCs in the world or combined together within the inventory to create new items. In addition to your inventory, you also have a thing called a Codex, and this thing stores useful information and drawings of the locations that you visit in the game, which I have to say look pretty awesome, and I assume there was some kind of concept art for the areas. Finally, you also have a kind of console which enables you to interface with different bits of machinery and computers, and a radio which allows you to communicate with other NPCs or contact your transport ship. Now I personally found the game's control scheme to be pretty intuitive after I got used to what all of the buttons did, but coming from PC, you can expect them to feel a little awkward when you first get started with the game. Now Beautiful Desolation plays very much like a standard point-and-click adventure, but instead of the usual side-scrolling perspective, the developers have opted for an isometric view which has both its positives and negatives. On the positive side, it's allowed them to build very detailed areas for players to explore, with each of them featuring their own distinct points of interest, offering up additional snippets of lore. The post-apocalyptic world of Beautiful Desolation feels believable, and the developers have done a great job of building on its backstory, as you'll find remnants of the old world littering the environments, with the occupancies of the new world built around them. Now, the downside to having this isometric view means that firstly, the perspective can make it difficult to determine what is and what isn't walkable terrain, and I did find myself struggling with depth perception at times. Unlike side-scrolling games where everything is laid out in front of you and key items usually stand out, areas in Beautiful Desolation really require you to explore them thoroughly, and on a number of different occasions I completely missed objects due to the prompts for them only appearing when I got close enough to them. So being an adventure game, Beautiful Desolation sees you travelling back and forth between areas, exploring environments, collecting items and interacting with NPCs. Throughout the game you engage in conversations with many different NPCs, and you're given several options on how you want to respond to them, which influences the information each NPC is willing to divulge to you. One thing I thought was great about the game though, was that every conversation is fully voice acted, and I felt this really brought the characters you meet to life.
So how you find your way to this little slice of heaven?
Now these conversations usually reveal more about the world, provide hints to guide you, or offer missions which you're required to complete in order to get to where you need to be going. And while the game does have a linear direction to its narrative, you're generally free to complete these missions in whatever order you see fit. Alongside the story and adventure elements, you also get to play a couple of mini-games, one of which involves you rolling dice as two critters battle it out in an arena, and while they weren't the most exciting of mini-games, they were well implemented into the storyline and lore of the game and offered a nice change of pace. Now the world of Beautiful Desolation is reasonably large, containing several habitable zones which you travel between by means of a shuttle. The overworld map is connected via a portal called the Warden, linking each of these zones, and one thing that I did find a little tiring about the game were the large number of load screens. In addition to these, as you play through the game, you also have to make repeat trips between zones and the locations within them, and while you can fly between areas using the autopilot system, you still end up spending a lot of time travelling, which does slow down the pace of the game considerably. While you sometimes are given hints about where to go or what to do next, the game really holds your hand, so I often found myself at a loss as to what I needed to do, and my only option was to revisit locations until I found the item or NPC that I needed. Now this brings me on to one final point about gameplay, which is that you really need to pay attention to what people are saying and take in the game's lore, as it's easy to become confused by the story and miss important details which may help you move forward. To give an example of this, at one point you're told that in order to gain access to a location called the Kettle, you need to know the password, and the only people that know the password are either those who live there or their relatives. It just so happens that a bartender you meet has a brother living within the Kettle, but if you weren't paying attention and skipped through the dialogue where he mentions his brother, then you could easily have missed this detail. So I know this review hasn't been the most detailed, and I've purposefully tried to be obscure whilst giving you at least some idea of what to expect from the game. Beautiful Desolation offers about 8 hours worth of playtime, and I personally really enjoyed playing this one. I'm a sucker for sci-fi games, and I enjoy a good story-driven game, especially ones which require a bit of puzzling, and Beautiful Desolation delivers on both fronts, though I did find the pace of the game a little slower when compared to other similar games. I also have to admit that I did refer to a guide a couple of times when I got stuck, but this was usually due to me not being thorough enough when exploring areas, so make sure that you do if you decide to pick up the game. Now I want to end this review by touching on the audio and visuals. I'll start by saying that I thought the game's artwork was fantastic, and I love the level of detail that has been put into making the areas and characters feel alive and believable. Having said this though, to port the game to the Switch, it appears the developers have had to reduce the quality of textures and images, which does result in things looking a little pixelated and blurry, especially when zoomed in close, and I did still notice a few frame rate stutters when moving through certain areas. It's also worth noting that the game features a ton of great cutscenes which usually play when you first arrive at a new area, and I thought these were a really nice addition, though along with the audio files, they do push up the file size of the game considerably. Now on the audio front, alongside the great voice acting I've already mentioned, we get some nice ambient environmental audio and sound effects breathing life into the world, and the game's soundtrack, which blends futuristic electronica beats with tones of traditional African music, is composed by Mike Gordon, the same guy who produced the music for Doom and several other high profile games, so you know it's going to be a pretty sweet soundtrack. So overall, Beautiful Desolation is a game which is really designed for those looking to slow things down a little and lose themselves in a lore-filled sci-fi world full of unusual beings and locations. When it comes to my own personal rating, I'm going to be giving Beautiful Desolation 4 out of 5 stars. Beautiful Desolation is a very interesting title whose gameplay might not be for everyone, but for those who appreciate a good story-driven game and want to play something a little less action-oriented, it's definitely worth a look. And so that's about it for this review of Beautiful Desolation on the Nintendo Switch. Don't forget to hit that like button if it helped you out, let me know your thoughts and opinions on the game in the comments section below, and if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, then please consider subscribing to the channel. For now though, I just want to thank you all once again for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves and game on.